after I shared a picture of my sourdough dinner rolls in my last vlog, many requests came in that I would show you how I made them. So they are a sourdough roll, which you can use this recipe for making rolls or bread or hamburger buns. We use it for many different things. It's a very delicious recipe and it's been pretty foolproof. I haven't had a batch go bad yet. This recipe is a long ferment. So I have one child that can't eat any sourdough products unless they've been fermented for at least 10 to 12 hours. And so this recipe does fit that. I got the recipe originally from a website called Simple Life by Kels, and so I will link her recipe in the description box below so that you can go over there to read exactly how she does it in her recipe. You'll have all the amounts and everything in there, and also that you can check out her website because she has lots of delicious sourdough recipes on her website. So let's get started. Okay, so for this recipe you need a sourdough starter that has been fed. I'm actually pushing things a little bit because I fed this probably 7-8 hours ago, I guess, and I usually do it after 4 or 5 hours, so hopefully they turn out for you guys, but now's the time I have to do it. You need some oil, you need eggs, and you need some all-purpose flour. So I just use an organic all-purpose flour for this recipe, and then just some salt. So the way I feed my starter is just very basic. I used to feed it with no scale at all and that worked fine too, but lately I've been using a scale. So I tare my empty jars so I have a good place to start. And then I weigh the amount of sourdough starter that I have currently, and I feed that with, I divide it in two. So I feed it with half of that amount of flour and then half of warm water. I just mix it together, cover it, and let it sit. You need 1 cup of starter, and you can see my starter is pretty thick. 1 cup of warm water, 1 tablespoon of salt. I forgot to mention that you need honey. That's one of the main ingredients, but you need a 1/3 cup of honey and a 1/2 cup of oil, but because I like to not do a lot of dishes, I actually I use the 1/2 cup measuring, so I get the 1/2 cup of oil, and then I just estimate how much a 1/3 cup is and put the honey directly in here. That way, I only have 1 measuring cup to wash, and the oil makes the honey slide out really easily. So you can see here, there's my 1/2 cup. I just kind of guess. So the last thing you're going to put in are your 6 eggs. So one thing that I should tell you about this recipe is that it was designed to be prepared in a mixer, but my mixer actually stopped working several months ago, and I honestly think it was because of making so much bread in it. I had a really nice KitchenAid stand mixer, but when you make bread like this, where you're making 2 loaves at a time and it's a pretty stiff dough, it actually started burning up the motor. 2, 4, 6, that's right. And sure enough, that is just what happened. My mixer just completely stopped working. So I had to learn how to make this bread by hand, kneading it by hand, which is wonderful because any of you who don't have a good mixer can still make this and be successful at it. If you do have a mixer, you can just do the kneading in your mixer, and even this part here in your mixer, instead of doing it by hand. So you're just going to whisk this until it's all combined, and then we're going to start adding our flour a little at a time. So this recipe calls for 8 or 9 cups of all-purpose flour, and you want to add it just a little at a time. So this is a 4-cup measuring cup that I filled up, and I'm going to add about 1 cup of flour and start mixing that in. Now someday I'm going to get one of those fancy Danish whisk things that you see the professionals use. I am not a professional, but I think I would really feel like one if I had one of those fancy whisks. But for now, I use this until it starts getting too thick, and then I'll switch to something else. So we're going to add another cup in, and we're just going to keep doing this until we can't mix it anymore. So you can see when it starts getting to the point that it's kind of like clogging this up and a little too thick, then I'll just tap it off and switch to something else. Now you can see this dough gets really stiff, which is again why I think my mixer ended up stopping to stop working. But when the dough gets really thick, then I will give up on the spoon and I will start kneading it by hand. At this point, I have just over 8 cups of flour in here. You can add more if needed, but I have found with the consistency of my thick starter and the other ingredients here that about 8 cups is pretty perfect. Okay, once it's mixed together about this consistency here, then I dump it out on the counter and I get rid of the bowl and keep on kneading here right on the counter. At this point, I actually will walk away from it for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, and it just seems like the flour has a chance to kind of soak in and absorb all the liquid, and it makes the kneading a little bit easier and helps you understand if you need more flour or not. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about kneading and what I've learned so far, and you can share your tips with me. Okay, at this point, I'm just trying to pick up the extra little flour pieces that I just dumped out from the bowl. So that's my goal here. Now, what I've learned about kneading in the short amount of time that I have been without a mixer is that your goal is trying to create tension. And once I learned this, I don't know, it was like a light bulb went on for me and my bread started turning out so much better. I used to just kind of like do some little mixy squeezy motions and not really have any particular goal in mind. But what I've learned is that the goal is to create tension, not just push it around. Now I can see right off the bat that I need a little bit more flour today. You see how that's just way too sticky. Okay. So after we get it together, a good ball together here, I am going to start trying to build that tension that I talked about. I am not a professional. If you guys want to see a professional bread baker making sourdough bread, you definitely need to go find another channel. I am just a mom of 9 who is trying to figure out how to bake sourdough bread that my family enjoys and I can do by hand with the time that I have. So at this point, I will usually put on a YouTube video because it helps the 10 minutes pass faster. I have found that about 8 to 10 minutes of hand kneading is really needed at this point to build the great amount of texture that I'm looking for, or tension that I'm looking for. So let me try to explain how I do this. I'm pushing it forward like you would typically with kneading, but then when I'm pulling it back, I'm actually using force to pull and try to bring this thing all together. Now at first it feels floppy and messy and like, what am I doing? What is going on here? But as I continue doing this, it will suddenly reach a point. Let's add a little more flour down there because it's kind of getting sticky. It will suddenly reach a point where it just feels different. I don't know, I can't describe it well. But when that happened to me the first time, I was like, oh, I get it. It gets a springiness or a feeling of like it's kind of pulling back when you're pushing it, and that is what you're looking for. Okay, so you're pushing forward and pulling back, pushing forward and pulling back, and just imagining that you're trying to create this into a springy loaf.
This is how you do this.
Okay, so we are about 6-ish minutes in, and you can see what I'm talking about. This dough, remember at the beginning it was all kind of floppy and, you know, felt very just not pulled together. After about 6 or 7 minutes of kneading like this, it's already got a lot of springiness going on, and it's tight. So again, I'm just pulling it forward, pushing, pulling, pushing, pulling. I know there are a lot of different kneading techniques. I have found that this works well for me. So just pull with the right hand, push with the left hand is kind of how I do it. So I don't get tired out, and it creates that tension that I'm talking about. A few times I have sprinkled some flour on it. I don't want it sticking to the counter in a way that I can't get it to move, although you don't want to over flour it, of course. So I just sprinkle a little bit as needed to keep it moving. So I'm going to do this for about another 2 minutes, and then we're going to put it into a greased bowl and leave it alone. I'm going to flip it over to make sure it's oiled everywhere, and then cover it with saran wrap, or you could use a wet towel, whatever you like. Now I'm going to let this sit for about 8 or 9 hours, and then I will show you the next step, which will include another second rise for about 2 hours. So that's how we equal that, you know, 10 to 12 hours. That works well for my family. All right, it has been about 8 hours. I have a baking tray that I have just sprayed lightly with some cooking oil spray. I'm going to take this out of here. And I'm actually just going to roll it into one really long roll so that I can cut it apart somewhat evenly. So the recipe says, you know, divide it in half, then divide it in quarters and all of that, but I found it works just fine just to start at one end and start cutting it off into balls that feel kind of similar sizes. Now the last time I made this, the rolls are actually a little too big to my liking, so I'm going to cut each of these in half one more time. Okay, now this is important. So what you're going to do with each one of these is actually you're forming it into a ball by tucking the sides down to the bottom. And again, this is because you're forming tension, and that tension will help it to rise the second time around. So you're going to do that for a while until it's kind of tense on the top, and then just pinch the bottom together to hold and put it on the tray. I usually leave about, I don't know, more than a ½ inch space between them. If you don't want them to touch at all, you need to leave a lot more space because they will rise and fill that.
Can I do that?
Okay, we have to whisk this first. So
Me too.
you do an egg wash for the top. You just use 1 egg and probably like a little tablespoon of water just to thin it out a little bit is what I put in this bowl. You're going to whisk it, and then you just brush the top of it. Now after we brush the top, I will stick this egg in the refrigerator for the next 2 hours while these rise, because then I'll brush it one more time before we stick it in the oven. Okay.
Now what?
You want to help brush? So you're just going to brush it right over the top like that. Okay. I think on the recipe she recommends covering it with either a greased piece of wet cling wrap or a damp towel or something like that. I have found that it's really not necessary, and it tends to kind of stick to it when I pull it off. Maybe it's just that I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. Just a second, buddy. I've found that if I just stick it in my oven, it keeps kids off of it and allows it to rise, and I haven't had a problem. So I just stick it in my cold oven. Okay, just pulled these out of the oven, and I just want to show you how delicious they look. They are buttery and golden. So the key to making sure that they are done inside is to use one of these oven thermometers. You want to make sure it's about 180 degrees inside. You just stick it right inside of one on the side. You won't even notice the hole, and it makes, if it's less than 180, like if you're getting down to 160, 150, you're going to have them too doughy inside, but once you hit 180, it's just perfect. Let me show you here. Oops, better turn my knife the right way, right? It's just delicious. These will be a hit anywhere you take them. So that's it. It's that easy. Enjoy.